The people who had access to you have no idea how unreachable you are to everyone else until they become everyone else. Have you ever noticed how the people who once had direct access to you often take that access for granted? They don't realize how rare it is. They don't realize how many people wish they could get the same level of attention, loyalty, patience, understanding, and support that you gave them. Because when someone has constant access to you, they stop seeing your value. What was once a privilege slowly becomes an expectation, and that's where the problem begins. The people who had access to you have no idea how unreachable you are to everyone else until they become everyone else. Think about that for a moment. When someone can call you anytime and you answer, when they can text you and get a response, when they can lean on you during difficult times, when they can count on your loyalty, when they can depend on your presence, they start believing that's normal. They start believing everyone has access to you the same way they do. They start believing your kindness is unlimited. They start believing your patience has no expiration date. And because they believe it will always be there, they stop appreciating it. Human nature has a strange way of undervaluing what's consistently available. The sun rises every morning, so most people don't stop to admire it. Oxygen is free, so people rarely think about it. And unfortunately, loyal people are often treated the same way. The more reliable you are, the more invisible your value becomes. Not because you're worthless, but because you've become familiar. Familiarity can make people forget how fortunate they are. That's why some people don't realize what they have until it's gone. They were not because you changed, not because you became difficult, not because you suddenly became cold, but because they crossed a line one too many times. Maybe they ignored your feelings. Maybe they betrayed your trust. Maybe they only showed up when they needed something. Maybe they repeatedly disrespected your boundaries. Maybe they assumed you would always stay. Whatever the reason, there comes a moment when enough becomes enough, and when that moment arrives, something shifts. You stop arguing. You stop explaining. You stop begging to be understood. You stop chasing people who clearly don't value your presence. You simply let go. And the funny thing is, many people don't notice immediately. At first, they think you're just busy. They think you'll come back. They think you'll answer eventually. They think you'll tolerate the behavior one more time. After all, you've always been there before. Why would this time be any different? But this time is different because something inside you finally woke up. You realized that loyalty should not require self-sacrifice. You realized that kindness should not invite disrespect. You realized that being understanding doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. And most importantly, you realized that access to you is earned, not guaranteed. So you step back quietly, without announcements, without drama, without revenge. You simply stop giving people VIP access to someone they no longer appreciate. And that's when reality begins to hit them. The phone calls become unanswered, the messages become shorter, the availability disappears. The emotional support they once relied on is no longer there. The person they assumed would always be within reach suddenly feels miles away. And for the first time, they experience what everyone else experiences: distance, limited access, boundaries, scarcity. Now they're standing on the outside looking in. Now they understand what everyone else already knew. You were never easy to reach. You simply made yourself available to them. There's a difference, a huge difference. Being accessible is a gift. Being entitled to someone's accessibility is an illusion. Many people confuse the two. They think because you've always been available, they automatically deserve continued access. But relationships don't work that way. Friendships don't work that way. Love doesn't work that way. Trust doesn't work that way. Every healthy relationship requires appreciation. Without appreciation, access eventually disappears. Some people learn this lesson too late. They only begin to miss your value when you're no longer available. They only recognize your loyalty after you've withdrawn it. They only appreciate your consistency after inconsistency enters their life, and suddenly, all the things they overlooked become impossible to ignore. They remember the conversations. They remember the support. They remember the encouragement. They remember the sacrifices. They remember the times you stood beside them when nobody else did. And now they wonder where it all went. But what they fail to understand is that none of it disappeared overnight. The distance they feel today was built one disappointment at a time, one broken promise at a time, one act of disrespect at a time, one moment of neglect at a time. The separation wasn't created in a single day. It was created through repeated choices. People often think relationships end because of one big event, but more often than not, relationships end because of hundreds of small moments that slowly destroy trust, a dismissive comment, a broken promise, a selfish decision, a lack of accountability, a failure to appreciate someone who genuinely cared. Each action seems insignificant by itself, but over time, they add up until one day, the person who kept forgiving finally stops. The person who kept understanding finally walks away. The person who kept giving finally closes the door, and suddenly, access is gone. Not because they hate you, not because they're bitter, not because they're trying to punish you, but because they've learned something important. Protecting your peace is not cruelty, it's wisdom. Some people will call it arrogance when you establish boundaries. Some people will call it pride when you stop tolerating disrespect. Some people will accuse you of changing. But often you're not changing. You're simply refusing to remain available to behavior that no longer deserves your presence. There's a difference, a strong difference. Growth often looks like distance to people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Read that again. Growth often looks like distance to people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. When you stop overextending yourself, when you stop saying yes to everything, when you stop rescuing people from the consequences of their actions, some people become uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because they were comfortable with the version of you that gave endlessly without requiring respect. The moment you value yourself differently, the relationship changes, and not everyone will like that. That's okay. Not everyone is supposed to stay. One of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that some people loved your access more than they loved you. They loved your availability, they loved your support, they loved your attention, they loved your willingness to help. But when boundaries appeared, so did their true intentions. Because genuine relationships survive boundaries. Selfish relationships don't. Healthy people respect limits. Entitled people resent them. And that distinction reveals everything you need to know. The truth is, you don't owe unlimited access to anyone. Not your time, not your energy, not your attention, not your emotional labor. These are valuable resources, and valuable resources should be invested wisely. Every day, people are competing for your attention. The world is full of distractions. Yet some people were fortunate enough to receive direct access to your heart, your mind, and your life. That's not something to take lightly. That's something to cherish. The people who understand this rarely lose access. Why? Because appreciation protects relationships, respect protects relationships, gratitude protects relationships, mutual effort protects relationships. When both people value the connection remains strong. But when one person starts taking more than they give, imbalance enters the relationship, and imbalance eventually creates distance. The saddest part is that many people don't recognize this until it's too late. They think there will always be another chance, another conversation, another opportunity, another day. But life doesn't promise unlimited opportunities. Sometimes the door closes, sometimes the chapter ends. Sometimes the person moves on, and when that happens, regret often arrives. Not because they lost access to just anyone, but because they lost access to someone rare, someone genuine, someone loyal, someone who cared deeply, someone who gave more chances than most people ever would. By the time they realize it, they're no longer standing inside your circle. They're standing outside of it, looking in, wondering how they lost what once seemed permanent. The answer is simple. They treated a privilege like an entitlement. And privileges disappear when they're repeatedly disrespected. This message isn't about revenge. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's not about making people suffer, it's about understanding your worth. It's about recognizing that your presence has value. It's about realizing that access to you should never come at the cost of your peace, because the right people won't require you to abandon yourself to keep them. The right people won't force you to choose between loyalty and self-respect. The right people won't treat your availability as an obligation. They'll appreciate it, protect it, respect it, and reciprocate it. If someone had access to you and lost it, that doesn't automatically make them a bad person. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes circumstances change. But regardless of the reason, one truth remains. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life forever. And that's okay. People come into our lives for different reasons and different seasons. Some stay, some leave, some teach lessons, some leave memories, but all of them reveal something valuable, including who truly appreciates your presence. So if you've been feeling guilty for creating distance, if you've been questioning your boundaries, if you've been wondering whether you're too hard to reach now, remember this: the people who once had access to you never realized how rare that access was, because they experienced a version of you that most people never get to experience. Your loyalty, your patience, your understanding, your generosity, your heart, they saw it up close. They benefited from it, and some appreciated it, others didn't. But once they become everyone else, the reality becomes clear. They finally understand what they lost. They finally understand that access to you was never ordinary. It was a privilege they assumed would last forever. And that's the lesson. Never beg people to appreciate your value. Never convince people to respect your presence. Never chase those who continuously overlook what you bring into their lives. The people who truly value you won't need constant reminders. They'll show it through their actions, through their respect, through their consistency, through their gratitude, and for everyone else, allow them to experience life without the access they once took for granted, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because sometimes, the greatest lesson people learn is realizing that the person they thought would always be there is no longer available. And by the time they understand your value, they are no longer the exception. They have become everyone else, and that's when they finally discover just how unreachable you really are. If this helped you understand the pattern, follow Soft Power Psychology for more clarity, not confusion and love. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown.